Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this year's Tenant Farm Association conference here at Windsor, which is entitled Reimagining the Landlord-Tenant Relationship in Agriculture. Does the Crown Estate Rural Strategy offer a way forwards for others? I was just thinking as I came in the car this morning, we brought the weather for the Cumbrian silage farmers today because they're all on at home, and I'm not too concerned about the arable boys. They're maybe not quite as happy at the moment. But when the wheat gets to 140, the milk price looks really good. So we're really looking forward to that. My name is Robert Martin, and I am the National Chairman for the Tenant Farm Association for England and Wales, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speakers. Firstly, we have the DEFRA Minister of State for Food Security and Rural Affairs, Daniel Zeichner. Welcome, Minister. And thank you for agreeing to be with us today. It's the second time I've seen the Minister this week. I was in the Tenants Forum, which was on the back of the Rock Review, so he knows we like to have a very frank and robust debate, and we don't hold back without questions, so that's a pointer for later on. Secondly, we have Paul Sedgwick, and I better get this right, who is the Deputy Ranger and Managing Director of Windsor and Rural for the Crown Estate. I would like to thank the Crown Estate for allowing us the use of today's venue and also our appreciation to have been part of the process of the environmental FBT development and hope that it will use as a template for landlords to follow in the future. And last but not least, we have my Chief Executive, Mr. George Dunn. He is the Chief Executive of the Tenant Farm Association, has been ever since Adam was a boy, and has forgotten more. He's forgotten more about tenancy law than anybody else can remember. So I'm always... it's quite funny, ever since I became chairman of the TFA, I now have to carry a thesaurus because George writes very long emails with very long words, so I need to just check them in my little book to make sure that they're all right, and they normally are. Before we start, I would like to offer our sincere thanks to our supporters today, the Crown Estate and Burgess Salmon, and also to our media partners, Farmers Weekly. So, without further ado, I would like to now hand over to our first speaker, Minister.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Robert, for that very kind introduction. What an amazing place to be, and what an absolutely gorgeous, beautiful day. Some of you will be aware there are elections going on across the country. My colleagues back in my part of the world are wondering what I'm doing, and when I told them I'm coming to such a glorious place as this, they looked very, very jealous indeed. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to not speak out speaking to the electorate today, but to be talking to you. And I'm absolutely delighted to be at an event. And the title, I think, gives a clue to looking ahead to the future. I think it's a rhetorical question, but I think I'm sure George is going to give a very clear answer to that one. And I suspect I'm going to agree with much of what he says. He and I and others have been talking about some of these issues for quite a few years now, right back to the period when I was leading for the opposition during the passage of the Agriculture Act. And I have to say George is a very, very tenacious advocate for you and does a great job for you. I want to say a few words in general about the situation at the moment, but start by just making some obvious points about the fact that there's much talk in the media at the moment about climate, about the environment. Absolutely clear to me and to my colleagues that restoring nature is not in conflict or competition with sustainable food production. Two have got to go hand in hand. I think that is actually widely acknowledged, but it should be the starting point. And it's a long-term business, as you all know. And that's why these agreements, innovative, I would say, in a space where this has been debated over some years, the issue of long-termism. I think it's a really good example of landlords and tenants working closely together to find ways of supporting farm businesses to make sure in future they're properly profitable, can produce food sustainably, and enhance nature's recovery. And it's based on collaboration, isn't it? That's the key. that long-term point gives tenants more security, allows tenants to have the confidence to invest and grow their business. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how these agreements work in practice, what they deliver as they're rolled out, and frankly, I very much hope that they can be used as a model more widely across the sector in future. And it is partnerships such as this, I would suggest, that will help us achieve long-term food security in our country. The world is not an easy place at the moment, it's fairly clear to see. And it's been said many times, but it needs to be said repeatedly, that food security is part of our national security. We've seen that global supply chains have been disrupted just in the last few weeks as we speak by geopolitical events. We know there are competing pressures on our lands, and we're seeing the climate change. It may be a glorious day, but I think many of us feel slightly nervous about 30 degrees on the 1st of May in our country. Of course, there are long-term issues, but I think the general sense I think many of us have, and when we look at the events across Europe over the last year or two, we can see many more extreme weather events. Now, the government wants to take a long-term view in response to this, so we're developing a 25-year farming roadmap. We're developing a food strategy. We want to base that on a profitable and sustainable farming sector with food production at its core. Now, given the tenancy sector manages a third of farmland in England, the tenancy sector is going to be a key part of that vision, and I want to work with you to help achieve it. So let me again start by reiterating my thanks to George, your organisation, for being key players in this discussion about how we go forward. And as Robert said, I was at the Farm Tenancy Forum earlier this week. It's a key range of people, expert people, who come together frequently. And as Robert said, it was a robust discussion, as you would expect at the moment. We talked about what's happened around SFI, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. And we talked actually quite extensively about the land use framework, where the consultation has just finished, and we're looking to take that forward. And I'm very grateful to the group for their insights, because I think that it's that discussion that will help the government make sure that we make the right decisions as we go forward. And this will be all governments, because these are long-term decisions that need to be made, and we need to build consensus to make sure. The strongest message I get all the time is people want to understand what the future is going to look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead. And that's not always easy in the modern world to establish. But for something as important as food production and environment and nature and climate, those timescales really matter. One of the things I am able to tell you today, we're making good progress on the appointment of a commissioner of the tenant farming sector. You'll know this is something that came from the ROC review. And as ever with government, it always takes longer than you want. I was able to announce that we were going to go ahead with it some months ago. We're through the quite close to the end process now of being able to appoint someone, and there'll be an announcement soon. And that commissioner will support positive collaboration between tenant farmers, landowners and their advisors, and crucially will promote the Agricultural Landlord and Tenant Code of Practice for England. That was put in place a while ago, and I think developed very closely with you, which sets out the expected standards of conduct in the sector. Will ensure fairness, including establishing a complaints service and providing a trusting and confidential point of contact for tenants, landlords or advisors who have concerns about poor behaviour. Whenever you do these things, it sounds like the suggestion is that the sector is riven with problems. It's not. But what we have heard and what we've been told is that having a mechanism for resolving problems where they do occur is really, really important. So I'm pleased to see this is now being embedded in the new environmental farm tenancy agreements that you and the Crown Estate have agreed. And again, I think that's a model for the way forward. So today is a day for celebrating these innovative new agreements and looking ahead to the potential for what they can deliver. But while celebrating that, let me address the concerns I know many of you in this room will have, and particularly around the announcement we had to make a month or so ago around the sustainable farming incentive. What I would say first of all is that in some of the debate it's almost sounded as if that scheme has finished or it doesn't exist anymore. nothing could be further from the case. We have a record number of farmers in environmental land management schemes, about 50,000 farm businesses. More than half of all farmland in England, more than 4 million hectares, is now managed under such schemes, which includes 38,000 live multi-year sustainable farming incentive agreements. So it's gone from a situation a year or so ago when there were too few people being interested to a different problem, which is too many. It's probably a good problem to have, but of course not if you're one of those people that hasn't got it. So that extremely high level of participation, I can only spend the budget I've got, meant that we had to stop accepting new applications. It's very important to point out that all existing agreements will be honoured, and that any outstanding eligible applications will be taken forward. If you entered a 3-year agreement this year, you will be paid until 2028. And we're working on and in discussion with TFA and others on what the next SFI offer will look like. It will depend, I can be absolutely candid, it will depend on the amount of money available, and that will in turn depend upon the spending review that's going on this summer. Once we know what we've got, we can make rational decisions then about a new scheme and a better way of essentially allocating and prioritising, because that was the problem with the previous scheme. It was first come, first served. And whilst that, when there weren't many people wanting it, seemed like a good idea, when suddenly there were more people wanting it, it's not such a good idea. But beyond SFI, we're continuing to support farmers to produce food sustainably whilst protecting the environment. The new countryside stewardship or higher tier offer opens for applications from invited farmers and land managers later this year, and the standalone capital grants offer will also reopen this summer after a short pause. Now, some of you will know that one of the 3 elements of the environmental land management schemes are the landscape recovery projects, very big, ambitious schemes, and we're developing about 50 of those at the moment. We'll also be increasing payment rates for higher level stewardship across a range of options this year. And we're extending the Farming in Protected Landscapes programme until March next year. We're also continuing the grant offers with up to £110 million available in grant competitions starting this spring, which are aiming to improve productivity, trial new technologies and drive innovation in the sector. So I think the point I'm making is, whilst I absolutely understand the difficulty that the way we had to stop going further forward with the SFI scheme has caused, there are many others who are in schemes that are working successfully at the moment. Now, the Secretary of State also, when he addressed the Oxford Farming Conference, made a point which I think on one level is fairly obvious, but perhaps needs to be made more often, which is we absolutely understand that you're running businesses, and businesses, quite frankly, need to be able to make a profit to succeed. Now, I know farming is often absolutely part of people's blood and their lives as well, but I think that has been a problem with the Common Agricultural Policy and predecessor systems, which has sometimes meant that the focus has drifted away from that key point that businesses do need to be viable and to be successful. And that, we think, is going to be the long-term security for this sector. So the Secretary of State asked Minette Batters, previous President of the National Farmers Union, to look closely and do some work over the next few months to look at what she would suggest and others would suggest would be needed to make sure that we can have a profitable sector. And again, none of this is particularly new. We know what a lot of the problems are, but we think that really focusing work and attention on that will be helpful. And we do think that she, as a tenant farmer, as well as her NFU experience, does bring credibility and experience to that role. So I'm working very closely with her to see what we can do to come back with really solid proposals. So those are my introductory comments. We're going to be doing a panel a little bit later. I know you will have questions, and I'll be delighted to answer them to the best of my ability. Very happy to hand over to Paul and to George, who are going to talk about the new agreements. But again, just finish by thanking them for their work on this. It's a collaboration. That's what's achieved, what you've done this morning. I think there's a bigger point about collaboration between government and the sector in general, which I would very much want to echo and enthuse about in future, because I think that's the only way we're going to be able to make the system work for you and for the country. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to Windsor on behalf of the Crown Estate and also the TFA. In the next 20 minutes, although, George, it might be slightly longer, I will attempt to give you a high-level overview of the Crown Estate, our rural strategy, some of the challenges and opportunities we're facing, and some of the ideas we're taking forward. The slides will all be circulated. They'll be on the TFA website, as some are quite detailed, so please don't feel that you need to try and read them all. Standing before you, I feel slightly like the groom giving his speech before the best man gets properly stuck in. But George, I am in control of lunch and the bus tour. So George will then take a really deep dive into the new EFBT, what he likes, what he doesn't like, and Kevin Kennedy from Burgess Salmon will join the panel discussion as the solicitor who had the inevitable task of trying to write the EFBT. Our strategy has been the combination of a lot of evolving work streams over the last 4 years. And I just want to quickly acknowledge and thank the Crown Estate's rural team who are here, Burgess Salmon, Carter Jonas Savills, WSP, and of course the TFA. However, I will start my talk with a caveat, and it is this. We are all seeking to address a central question about the future of land use and how we achieve the right balance between many competing demands. There is no set answer. This is merely our attempt at trying to answer that question. On our rural estates, we have a strategy to try and tackle these issues, one that has evolved over the last 3 years. To some, it's going to be interesting, engendered debate and challenge. To others, I fear I may simply be speaking in Russian. But here goes. So, who are we? The Crown Estate was established in 1760 and the modern-day version in 1961 by an Act of Parliament. We ultimately exist to serve the nation, with all our net revenues being returned to the Treasury for the benefit of the nation. Our portfolio covers 3 distinct areas of marine, urban, and rural, with a huge diversity of assets spread across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Our overarching strategy, acting in the long-term interest of the nation, enables us to positively impact on the nation's climate, nature, communities, and finances, all of which are aligned to our purpose. Over the last decade, the Crown Estate had been selling a number of its rural land holdings to help fund developments due to our inability to borrow money. However, a change of chief executive, a new purpose, alongside a new overarching strategy for the business has led to a major policy rethink. In addition, recent legislation, thank you, Minister, this year has led to borrowing and investment powers being granted to the Crown Estate for the first time. This will be absolutely transformational to the work that we do. Rural now forms an integral part of the business alongside our urban and marine portfolios. Land is our oldest asset class and really goes to the DNA of the Crown. This has allowed us to look at our rural estates through a different lens and a new strategy. Change is coming, and the landed sector needs to be prepared to lead in this space, and urgently so. As one of the UK's largest landowners and offering geographical representation, we have a unique opportunity to take a leading position in this period of unprecedented rural change. We intend to occupy this space and offer to share our ideas, successes and failures to help others on the journey of transition. The TFA has agreed to be our critical friend on this journey. Our land holdings, including Windsor Great Park, extend 205,000 acres. That's sort of 2 Isle of Wights in modern money, covering 30 estates we cover all sizes and complexities of land holdings. We are predominantly a let estate, but farm in hand in Northumberland and at Windsor. More about Windsor later on the coach tour. Our portfolio is roughly a third AHA, a third FBT, and a third upland commons in Wales and Cumbria. The majority of our farmland is grade 1 and 2. Over 60% of our land is grade 1 and 2. We also have 21% of our land designated as priority habitats and about 7% tree cover. This is all set over about 550 farms, farmed by about 300 farmers. Our farmers face acute systems challenges. In the last 3 years, we have seen an unprecedented level of change, both domestically and on a worldwide stage. Land use used to be 2 simple and innocuous words. Now, it is deeply polarizing. The twin challenges of a struggling climate and biodiversity are complex, in many ways a generational challenge, a systems challenge, but the myriad of potential differing land uses led us to look in detail at our current and future portfolio mix. We also believe that the Crown Estate can play an important role in tackling broader national needs. Government has an ambitious environmental and rural agenda with limited funds to deliver at scale. Public sentiment and opinion have reached a level that is unlikely to diminish. It's incumbent on us as landowners, farmers, and advisors to lead in this space and to take and make some brave decisions. We think that there is an urgent need to revisit the traditional land tenure model to find more modern ways of sharing in these future income streams. A partnership model built on trust and longevity, rather than a landlord and tenant system in many ways that is adversarial and doesn't align to future markets and opportunities. In essence, it needs to modernize. This has led to the evolution of our strategy and helped us size the prize, identifying financial, environmental, and social impacts. The simplicity of this chart masks the huge amount of work that was undertaken over a year. It has led us to defining 4 key strategic pillars for our strategy. Pillar 1, around optimizing the performance of our portfolio. Pillar 2, leading in the delivery of the green agricultural transition. Pillar 3, leading in the delivery of nature recovery. And Pillar 4, replenishing the locker in terms of land acquisitions. While setting some key themes around the vision for the portfolio, around creating resilient and diversified farms, having food production at its core, and the need to change the dial in the let sector. Ultimately, we believe there was a need to seek a different approach to the landlord-tenant relationship. It needed a reset. The long-awaited government land use framework is nearly with us. In its absence, 3 years ago, we put in place our own to help guide our decision-making. And thankfully, much of what you've seen from the DEFRA in recent times aligns to our draft framework as well. One thing I do firmly believe in is that the rural sector needs to step up to this challenge around the land use framework. There is a need to do more and quickly. Public sentiment is such that if we don't lead into this challenge, then I do not think it is beyond the realms of a future government from legislating to effect the necessary outcomes to deliver nature recovery and stem the biodiversity crisis. There is simply too much at risk. We are very clear at the Crown Estate that if we wish to have a vibrant and successful tenanted rural portfolio, we need to help build resilience into our farmers' businesses and at pace. In a farming sector facing the total removal of subsidies, seeking to build on-farm diversification of income streams and a diversity of land uses will be critical not only to the lasting resilience of our farming businesses, but also to the Crown Estate. This has helped us shape some draft land use allocations, moving from ditch-to-ditch farming to a blended mixture of land and property uses, creating broader income stacking and resilience away from primary crop production. In essence, this led us to our new strategy and direction, an aim, an aspiration to be an exemplar landlord, setting the guardrails, supporting our farmers, and hopefully moving to a collegiate partnership relationship whilst driving the highest possible standards in what we do. So, how have we gone about delivering this? For those who've been in the profession or farming for a long time, none of this is new and none of it is rocket science. What we first needed to discover were what were the barriers to effecting genuine change to ensure a reset between food production and nature recovery. Was the past a clue to the future? In many ways, collaboration, private finance, and academia all have a part to play in changing the dial. But ultimately, nothing works without the input and acceptance of those owning and managing the land. Could our farmers, and indeed would our farmers, want to make this change without it being forced on them? We've been really surprised by what has unfolded at scale across our portfolio in a very short period of time, 3 years. We will now take a quick look into each of the 4 key pillars of the strategy. In Pillar 1, we're looking to create resilient businesses by optimising and unlocking the latent revenue and capital value of the portfolio. Simply said, diversification at scale. This is looking to shape growth beyond the combine or the parlour. The latent diversification opportunities that exist on our portfolio are of a scale that is both exciting and challenging. However, delivering this additionality or income stacking is leading to more in-depth conversations with our farmers around future land use and how we approach and tackle the competing land use challenges from food production, nature recovery, energy, and housing. We're scaling up rural diversification across our estates. We have 200 projects ongoing or planned at the moment. These are a mixture of landlord-tenant or joint initiatives. The ongoing review of permitted development rights on farms will be absolutely critical to the timely implementation of these, not just for the Crown Estate, but farmers countrywide. These slides offer a snapshot of some of the work recently completed in the last 2 years. In addition, this is having a positive impact for the Crown Estate, with this graph showing the impact on capital values through the old-style hands-off institutional approach on the left, with very limited growth on the right, of 3.5%, with a more active collegiate management model showing 14% capital growth in our rural estates. This is important as both the Crown Estate and our farmers run businesses that need to make profit. We need to generate financial return for the nation. Slide 20 simply shows a more detailed analysis carried out by Stratton Parker on our Bingham estate. In Pillar 2, we are trying to seek out ways to help our farmers navigate to different types of food production systems whilst tackling some of the major national issues in relation to net zero and the biodiversity crisis. We carefully considered what role the Crown Estate should seek to take in this national discussion about the future use of land and felt that as one of the largest and oldest landowners, we should use our unique attributes to try and take a leading role. This may ultimately, I believe, lead to the disruption to the old institutional land management model, but is that such a bad thing? The other options around observing and supporting were too much the old way. The Crown Estate has a national need to address some of the major issues facing our country in relation to sustainability. Our rural portfolio emits 190,000 tonnes of carbon per year. We have ambitious net zero and carbon reduction targets aligned to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Simply put, we could not see a way that landlords and tenants in the current system could partner to support and trial digital technology, measure and collect consistent data, and to make meaningful and lasting changes across the other pillars by using a standard FBT. There was a genuine need for change, a change of mindset for both the Crown Estate and our farmers. And the only way it was going to work was that if both parties benefited in the long term. Enter the TFA and a conversation that was to span 18 months and 15 draft versions of the EFBT. This is the vehicle to allow us to put all of these ideas into action across the portfolio. The simple aim of the EFBT is to create the guardrails for both parties to align across common and shared aspirations, some known and some unknown. An integrated approach, a partnership approach with both parties sharing in these opportunities seemed to us to be the only equitable way to proceed. And ultimately, we need our farmers to keep farming to help achieve this balance across land use pressures and complexity. We listened to our farmers about the need for longer lease terms, so investment decisions could be made and genuine longer-term change could be made to a more regen farming system. A different mindset was taken on farm rents, and especially around removing the blockers on delivering our aspirations. Around 15% of our land, the marginal land, moving into long-term nature recovery to align to the government's 30 by 30 targets. The mind map on the screen shows some of our thinking. The green bubble focuses on what is known as the Green Book, which accompanies the EFBT, setting out the shared nature ambitions for the estate or the farm. Each estate or farm has a bespoke environmental plan provided by a local ecologist with farmer input at the Crown Estate's expense. This will become the norm for all our farms. This Green Book forms part of a suite of EFBT documents and is key to helping both parties agree and deliver the nature recovery ambitions across our farmland. The pink bubble, or it might be orange on the screen, focuses on the Pink Book, which accompanies the EFBT, setting out the social aspirations of this arrangement. Our farms are becoming increasingly more focused on educational visits and the social impacts of their farming business. The blue bubbles set out the key themes around the actual EFBT, all of which George will unravel in a minute. We will see how the market reacts when we launch 3 farms to let on EFBTs tomorrow. The first farm is a fully equipped Grade 1 farm in Holbeach, Lincolnshire. The second, a small block of land at Gedney Drove, Lincolnshire. And the third, which I think will be the most interesting, is a 500-acre, fully equipped arable farm in Swine in Yorkshire. We've already used our earlier versions of the EFBTs for 2 earlier lettings. These were well received by the incoming farmers, welcoming the longer term, the 15 years, and bringing forward ambitious nature recovery plans far greater than our initial 15% ambition. We are currently transitioning all expiring FBTs onto this new agreement. We challenged our farmers about the future and whether the rural sector can deliver the scale of change necessary to effect genuine nature recovery without the need for legislation. Many of you will remember the McSharry reforms, which introduced set-aside to curb a glut of overproduction. But the unintended consequence of that, in many ways, was an environmental gain, with 15% of land left uncropped and fallow. Was this, perhaps, with hindsight, an opportunity lost? I wonder whether we'd be facing such similar nature recovery challenges today if set-aside had not been scrapped in 2008. Just a passing thought that is personal to me. We are repurposing 15% of our land into nature recovery, in addition to our existing 21% of priority habitats, aligning to the Lawton principles. The identification of this land is farmer-led. We are simply aligning to the government's targets. Our Rural Environment Fund, or as it has become known as our chief exec, the hedge fund, is an initial capital fund of £10 million, now increased to 20 million, which is available to our farmers, which promotes the uptake of no regrets nature recovery work. This has simply been swamped by the uptake and positivity of our farmers. This fund sounds very large, but over an initial 5-year period, this equates to £4 million per annum over 200,000 acres. The maths equate to £20 per acre per year. I would argue that most landowners and private estates of any size can afford that level of investment into nature recovery. What surprised us was just how simple it has been to remove the blockers and barriers to this change of mindset around delivering nature recovery alongside food production. The uptake from our farmers has been extraordinary, a really simple move with almost no downside. In the first 3 years, nearly 300 kilometres of new hedgerows have been planted, normal 2-metre wide hedges, and His Majesty's newly designed Windsor hedgerows, which are between 6 and 9 metres wide. This is perhaps the ultimate hedge fund. This autumn, we will plant a further 100 kilometres of new hedges proposed by our farmers. We're targeting 1,000 kilometres of new hedgerows by 2035. In addition, we are seeking, in memory of our late Queen, to plant a series of Jubilee woods across all our estates, which would create one of the largest woodland creation schemes in England. We are seeking to increase our woodland cover from 7% to 16.5% to align to government targets. We've made a good start. We have 650 acres of new woodlands in the ground. The emerging natural capital markets offer another route to accelerate and fund the required nature recovery programme. This is being piloted, but these markets are still nascent. We are currently holding a watching brief on this, but we do believe that the arrival of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, will have far more impact on the emerging markets as companies begin to understand the impacts they're having on both climate and nature and the need to find a solution. Carbon, natural capital, nature recovery and BNG all offer future income streams for both landlord and tenant. So setting out these future shared aspirations within the EFBT is key to better future relationships. I can't believe I'm going to say the next bit, George, but I am. My team will be nervous about this. We accept that rents may reduce. I've got over it. Indeed, we are actively reducing them on land, transitioning to nature recovery in order to drive better outcomes. We've listened to our farmers, and of course George, about the length of our tenancy agreements, extending these to 15 years, and in some cases, specific cases, longer. But surely, this is the price a landlord with a genuine long-term view on custodianship and stewardship should and must be prepared to accept. It will require individual solutions to challenges, but it needs landowners to step up and make these difficult decisions and to change the dial on how we approach land management in the future. This is not an easy task in a centuries-old sector baked in tradition. In Pillar 4, we're actively looking at opportunities to invest into additional mixed-use let estates with long-term optionality, which support our strategy. We've used a powerful set of geospatial data sets to map all our land, broken down into 0.1 hectare polygons, overlaid with every available data set in the UK. That has created 10 million lines of data and analysis, allowing us to identify the constraints and opportunities. Very similar themes, as you'll see, to the land use framework. This will ultimately inform us of our future requirements to help deliver the shape of our portfolio. In 2024, in September, we acquired a further 3,000 acres of let land, the main block of 2,500 acres at Dissington, near Ponteland, and a further 400 acres in Romney Marsh. It was our first acquisition for a decade. We hope that this will be the first of at least similar levels of acquisition each year for the next decade moving forward. We are also focusing on what the Crown Estate's role is and what it means to be a genuine long-term steward of land, and how we assess and capture the total value of land in the broadest sense, beyond a simple financial return. What has become increasingly clear is that the old institutional land management model is no longer fit for purpose. A hands-off approach no longer works. Managing and leading in this space requires partnership with our farmers, more active long-term management by the Crown, and building partnerships with organisations that can genuinely make a difference on the ground. We will share our EFBT and the documentation and the learnings with the industry to help shape a wider discussion and affect change, and hopefully lead to system-level change. Hopefully others will take the current document to a better place. And no doubt, as we receive feedback from our farmers, the TFA, and maybe some of you today, we will be drafting further changes. We're therefore making a number of interventions now to start to repivot our portfolio into an example and hopefully an exemplar of best agri-environmental practice. We've course-corrected, we've road-tested, and we're confident that we can deliver the strategy. It is clear to us that taking this different approach to land management and seeking to listen and remove the blockers that traditionally have existed between landlord and tenant will see exciting things happen at scale and quickly. The last 36 months have proved this. But one thing is absolutely clear, and that is without the buy-in and support from our farmers, nothing will change. Time will tell if we are making a real difference. I hope that we will do so. There is simply no option to retain the current status quo. We hope that others, however big or small, will undertake similar journeys similar to ours. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for being with us today, all of you, for making journeys from far and wide to be here at Windsor. And it's great to follow both the Minister and Paul this morning. I first came across Paul when he was on the Stratfield Say estate for the Duke of Wellington, and we did some innovative things then. Indeed, I find you to be quite mischievous in certain ways, but I knew you were a bloke that we could do business with into the long term as you move through the landlord-tenant sector. And Minister, I hope you don't mind me sharing a private conversation which we had early doors when the Minister was appointed as the shadow farming Minister. He contacted me and said, "Look, George, I'm a Cambridge MP. You're going to have to teach me about this farming malarkey." And to be fair, he allowed me and was gracious enough, and along with others, to have an input into his policy thinking and his narrative. And whilst we obviously respect that he is a member of His Majesty's Royal Government, we know that he cares passionately about our industry and wants to do the best for it. And he maintains that open door policy for us to have a discussion, even though sometimes we disagree. So, I've been the Chief Executive of the TFA for nearly 3 decades. And as you can imagine, over that period of time, I have seen a considerable amount of churn. However, even just a few short years ago, I wouldn't have thought it would have been possible to be holding this conference with the Crown Estate, let alone talking about the innovative work that we have been undertaking together over the past decade and a half. It would be impertinent for me to highlight some of the issues that we have had with the Crown Estate in the past. Paul has alluded to some of them. But I would just say I am delighted that the Crown Estate has fallen back in love with its rural estate, and that it is seeking to build collaborative and collegiate relationships with its tenant farmers to achieve business success, both for those businesses and for lasting benefit to the nation. The Agricultural Tenancies Act in 1995 was a huge turning point for the landlord-tenant sector of agriculture across England and Wales. It was introduced in an era when the Conservative government of the day was deregulating everything from the stock exchange to local bus services, and the 1995 legislation was seen as a legislative revolution. Happily, from the perspective of the TFA, the new legislation left tenancies regulated by the Agricultural Holdings Act 1986 largely intact. Indeed, we as an organisation have resisted calls over the intervening 3 decades suggesting that a date should be set for all 1986 Act tenancies to be recast as farm business tenancies. And the TFA's position on that has hardened over the intervening years, principally because of the deeply disappointing way in which the landlord community has used the legislation to date. The deregulatory approach behind the legislation provided the sector with an almost entirely blank sheet of paper to write and develop tenancy agreements that were bespoke and fit for purpose in individual circumstances. Of course, the legislation continued to have 1 or 2 guardrails, including in the way in which rent was to be reviewed or on end-of-tenancy matters. Some of those guardrails were relaxed, where we were finding the shoe to be pinching with the 2006 Regulatory Reform Order and the Agriculture Act 2020, which the Minister alluded to earlier. And on both of those pieces of legislation, the TFA was very heavily involved in ensuring that the legislation was fit for purpose for our sector. But sadly, due to the imbalance of supply and demand within the sector, with many more individuals seeking land than offering land, instead of being a liberating moment, the legislation ushered in a culture of short-termism, restriction, and transactionalism, rather than long-term, flexible agreements built on collaborative and collegiate relationships. If I could, for one moment, ask you to imagine the extent of the freedom of contract available to us under the 1995 legislation as amended as the area of a football pitch. Since its introduction, we have barely spent any time outside the centre circle because of the restrictive drafting of farm business tenancy agreements. Lawyers, apologies to those in the room, and others drafting tenancy agreements have taken a very conservative approach in a very risk-averse manner, with covenants that are onerous on tenants and light on landlords. Now, of course, I understand that there was a reaction against the years of perceived protectionism afforded to tenant farmers under the 1986 Act, with a number of landlords feeling particularly scorched by the introduction of succession tenancies. However, we are 30 years on since that legislation, and we're still living with the legacy of the past, and it is routine to see short-term agreements with very restrictive terms and considerable reserve rights being granted to landlords. As we have seen over recent years, against the emergence of consideration of environmental and natural capital objectives, the natural tendency for those drafting agreements has been to seek to corral those into the camp of the landowner rather than finding a way to think about them collegiately with tenants. Now, although the total area of let land over the past 30 years has remained remarkably stable, we have seen the balance within the let sector move so that there is now more land let in England and Wales under farm business tenancies than under the old-style Agricultural Holdings Act agreements. Whilst I say it has taken 30 years to get to this point, looking at the demographics, it's quite likely that the pace of change will accelerate, although we will be left with a very low-level flat line of continuing AHA tenancies well into the future, where they are held by companies or are otherwise assignable. So given the inevitability that all but a few of the acres farmed within the let sector of agriculture will be governed by the 1995 legislation as amended, it behoves us all to think about how we shape the tenancy agreements of the future to deliver sustainable and thriving businesses, fair returns to landlords, nice to hear about the lower rents, and benefits to the nation. To my mind, the landlord-tenant system of agriculture continues to provide a good platform for farming. It combines those who are asset-rich but who lack the desire or capacity for entrepreneurial risk with those willing and able to take risk but who lack the assets to conduct their farming activity. It provides liquidity to the most fixed factor of production in agriculture, which of course is land. It provides a route in for new entrants who would never be able to afford the costs of entry if buying land was the only entry point. And it also provides flexibility to expanding and progressive businesses wanting to develop and grow. However, there is a real threat of all of these benefits being undermined if we continue to perpetuate a sector where the average length of term on all tenancy agreements is between 3 and 4 years, where 85% of all new tenancy agreements are let for 5 years or less, and where tenants are fully restricted to agricultural use only, with landlords reserving the right for all non-agricultural activity and natural capital benefits, leaving tenants feeling wholly disenfranchised. Worse than that, the tendency is to produce agreements which will see tenants losing access to land completely, where their landlords wish to pivot more towards those environmental or non-agricultural uses. We have seen it with tree planting, we've seen it with solar energy, with housing, and we're now beginning to see it grow around issues such as biodiversity net gain, carbon offsetting, conservation covenants, schemes for nutrient neutrality, and rewilding. If there was ever a time when we needed to reimagine the landlord-tenant relationship within agriculture, it is now. We need to ensure that we can capitalize on the benefits of the system whilst avoiding the sinkholes of disenfranchisement and dislocation for tenant farmers that have so often characterized how tenants feel about their position. Now, I'll never miss an opportunity for a bit of lobbying, Minister, you know that. I want to say that whilst Daniel is with us, that we do need a clear signal from the government that it understands the dynamics of the tenant-landlord system and support to deliver long-term flexible agreements, providing a strong platform for sustainable businesses and for generating wider public goods. To that end, whilst not impacting the landlord who is hosting us today, the changes to inheritance tax announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in October are of grave concern to the led sector of agriculture. When the government is ready to bring forward legislation to implement those tax changes later in the year, I would urge the government to think about what the TFA has talked about for many years, that it will include provisions allowing landlords letting land under secure agricultural tenancies or for fixed terms of 10 years or more to add the value of that land into the zero-rate band for inheritance tax to provide that they can irrevocably lock in their capital taxation position in respect of that land from day one of that lease until the lease expires. However, it's very easy for an organisation like the TFA simply to throw stones or to be critical. It's more of a challenge to come forward with positive proposals for change. However, I would like to think that certainly under my tenure as Chief Executive of the TFA, we have sought to be constructive in our challenge. In that respect, I have been pleased to hear landlords such as the Church Commissioners, Duchy of Cornwall, the National Trust, and others, and now including the Crown Estate, describe the TFA as a critical friend. That is exactly the space within which I believe the TFA works best. And when Paul invited myself and my then National Chair, Mark Coolman, to a meeting in Windsor in August 2023, we had been given a hint in advance of the meeting that there was going to be a change in the approach of the Crown Estate to the management of its rural estate. And that was, as you might imagine, music to our ears, and Paul did not disappoint. What became clear throughout the meeting and our discussions was the sheer scale and ambition of the change, which was much larger than we could have imagined, particularly against the backdrop of the history of the Crown Estate's management of its rural estate. Paul has already outlined the new direction of travel for the vision of the Crown Estate, to be much more focused on total return, to put the nation's interest first, and to meet nature's needs. Of course, as he has described, Food production will be at the core of the rural estate going forward, but this will be balanced with nature and with non-food uses. What I found most empowering about our discussions was the willingness of the Crown Estate, in the context of seeking to develop its new strategy, to leave no stone unturned and to leave no sacred cows off the altar. And that included the way in which farm business tenancy agreements should be constructed so that the new strategy could be truly delivered alongside the long-term success of farming families across the portfolio of the Crown Estate. In the month following that August meeting between Paul and us, he invited the TFA to engage with the Crown Estate on reimagining the relationship between itself and its tenant farmers. And as I do with every engagement I have on behalf of members, please be assured that when I go into those meetings, I feel the eyes of our members boring into the back of my head as I sit there to represent their interests in discussions, be that with ministers, landlords, or others. We were given confidential and exclusive access to what Paul described as draft 2 of its environmental farm business tenancy agreement, and they were very proud of it, with an open engagement, an open invitation to engage in discussions with both the Crown Estate and their legal advisors, Burgess Salmon, to properly shape that agreement into a fully functioning and beneficial contract for both the landlord and the tenant in the context of the vision articulated for the totality of the Crown Estate's landholdings. To cut a very, very long story short, we then engaged in 15 months of discussion, debate, and deliberation, resulting at the beginning of December 2024 with an agreed version of the EFBT agreement, which we were prepared to show to the world, which had then been through 13 further incarnations to that point, the final version being draft 15. And I'm sure this will not be the final version, as Paul has alluded to, which will flex against the experience of its use in the field. However, my view is that this agreement pushes us well outside the centre circle of the football pitch of freedom of contract that I referred to previously. It breaks new ground, takes risks in a way in which previous agreements didn't, and it's not afraid of identifying and articulating grey areas and avoiding binary answers to questions. In contract drafting terms, I'm pretty sure it will send shivers down the spines of many a lawyer and others writing agreements who have been used to taking a conservative approach to drafting, and I see that as a very good thing. If the 1995 Act could be described as a legislative revolution, I believe the EFBT agreement is a contractual revolution. It works on the basis of a 15-year agreement without open-ended break clauses for the landlord, but with break clauses available to the tenant if necessary. Now, on that basis alone, we're looking at a length of term afforded to only less than 5% of tenants on FBTs in the current marketplace each year. In addition, the EFBT trumps many of those existing long-term FBTs, which will contain break clauses capable of bringing those agreements to an end on a no-fault basis well within the terms specified. I am delighted, too, that the agreement nails the Crown Estate's colours to the mast of the recently agreed Landlord and Tenant Code of Practice, which details the need for the parties to focus on clarity, communication, and collaboration. And those words are easier said than done, but the manner of the drafting of the EFBT agreement does, in my view, deliver those principles. As would be anticipated in this type of agreement, it contains mechanisms for defining the measurement of biodiversity and carbon, including understanding their baselines and metrics for determining uplift. The agreement has a focus on environmental enhancement and looks at the environmental condition of the holding, as well as its physical condition, both at the beginning and at the end of the lease. The lease addresses soil nutrient levels, soil structure, and how they might be improved. The agreement is explicit about working collaboratively with tenants to deliver environmental uplift, and that the financial benefit of that uplift should be shared appropriately between the landlord and the tenant. See Clause 4 of the EFBT agreement. Now, most FBT agreements currently drafted will restrict tenants, as I've said, to use the land subject to the tenancy for agricultural purposes only. Some agreements may contain provisions allowing tenants to take part in public environmental schemes with the consent of the landlord. Very few agreements which I've seen would allow tenants to be involved in creating environmental outcomes through private markets. Fortunate tenants may have clauses which state that any consent required from the landlord may not be unreasonably withheld or delayed. But the EFBT agreement that we're talking about today truly breaks the mold by making it clear within the agreement that the landlord fully expects the tenant to come forward with ideas for environmental enhancement and provides a mechanism for those ideas to be tested, approved, and taken forward. To help with the process, alongside the EFBT agreement, the landlord and the tenant will set out their joint environmental aspirations for the holding through what Paul has described as the Farm Green Book, which will make sure that there is clarity for both parties at the beginning of the tenancy over the direction of travel that will be taken to achieve those environmental goals. Similarly, the normal position within a standard FBT is to prevent tenants from taking part in diversified activities on the holding. Again, there will be some agreements which will provide that the tenant can ask for consent for and a small number which will provide that consent is not unreasonably withheld or delayed. As with environmental plans, the EFBT agreement also opens the door to farm tenants to be able to present diversification ideas to the Crown and includes a similar architecture within which those ideas can be put into practice. See Clause 5 of the EFBT agreement. And to help with this, alongside the EFBT agreement and the Farm Green Book, the parties will agree a farm partnership book, which Paul has described as the Pink Book, which will address the issues around diversification, local engagement, education, public access, and the benefits of how those might be shared between the landlord and the tenant. The principles around which this agreement are based are security, clarity, collaboration, flexibility. My screen has done something weird. I do apologize. There we are. Collaboration. I could see stuff on here that you couldn't see. My goodness. Yes, collaboration, flexibility, and proportionality. Already, I am aware of several institutional and private estates who are looking to get their hands on the template agreement for use on their own estates. And this could be a major driver towards a complete reimagining of the landlord-tenant system in agriculture, which, as well as providing viable businesses, will also deliver important public benefits for the nation as a whole. Now, referring back to my comment around throwing stones, whilst we were delighted to be asked by the Crown Estate to engage with it in the development of its EFBT agreement, Paul, as he often does, then went one stage further. He asked whether the TFA would be publicly able to endorse the document and allow its logo to be emblazoned on the front of it. Never before, to my knowledge, have we been asked by any landlord to endorse a tenancy agreement in this way. But I'm very pleased to report that when this question was put to the TFA's executive committee, where I was expecting lots of folded arms, which has representatives from the membership from right across England and Wales, there was unanimous agreement that we should say yes. And there's our logo on the EFBT agreement. Of course, in individual circumstances, there may be tweaks that will need to be made, and it's also accepted by the Crown Estate that were, for whatever reason, there are negotiations to switch an AHA agreement into an EFBT, there will need to be a discussion around extending the length of term to be commensurate with the security being surrendered. However, the architecture of the EFBT agreement, I believe, is sound, and I would personally recommend its use. Of course, individual tenants will need to take their own advice, and those who are members of the TFA can speak to us directly about that. I know that Paul, and indeed I, are keen to ensure that this is not a development reserved for the Crown Estate. Already it has sparked interest on a range of other estates, as I've said, and I do hope that there will be a flood of copycat agreements springing up in all sorts of places. And unselfishly, Paul and the Crown Estate are not seeking to insist upon their intellectual property rights over the EFBT agreement, and they will be pleased to make it available to anybody who wants to see it and use it as a basis for finding an approach which works on their individual circumstances. And Kevin from Burgess Salmon, I do apologise, but Paul has given you some more work to do, in that anybody can email Kevin Kennedy at Burgess Salmon, and Kevin will provide you, under Paul's direction, with the pack of information which will explain and provide you with the EFBT agreement. So when rolling out this agreement through the Crown Estate's retained agents, I do hope that they too will see the benefit of being advocates on behalf of the agreement with their clients and perhaps their firms and other clients with whom they work. So as I conclude, I would like to express my thanks and gratitude to Paul, his Crown Estate Rural team, and to Kevin Kennedy of Burgess Salmon for the very open-handed way in which the development of this new agreement has been handled. Thank you very much.